talk about the customer that we're both working at. But first, as you can see, rule number one: keep it simple, stupid, and that doesn't always work. So let's introduce ourselves.
Yes, I'm Renee, or I'm René, but when you say it in English, it's Renee. Yeah, René. Oh. I've worked at IT in Denmark as an IT architect, but I used to work for the customer that we're currently working for. So I've been working for IT for 2 years, sitting at the same desk that I sat at when I used to work for the customer. So yeah, I'm not really on social media, so you can't follow me anywhere unless it's outside. That's pretty fucking creepy, so don't do that. Like I said, what I'm lacking experience to make up with guessing, I really believe in that a lot of the things in IT is an area where there's no formal knowledge. You are pushing the boundaries, so you have to do a little guesswork. I mean, you put your experience in it, but you guess a whole lot. So I have no formal training, no nothing. I just kind of try to make it up as I go.
And by the way, this picture he sent to me while I was still on the plane. It is in some building here on the...
Yeah, 360 view. Somewhere, I should have probably noted where it was, but we were walking around. And there's a mall that has a 360 view on top.
The view looks nice.
Yeah, it was. Only that fucker in the way.
Okay, so, well... Ooh,
that's correct.
That scares even me.
It was high res back in the day. Right? That was a high res.
It says here, res.
Yeah.
Okay, my name is Dakota. I'm an independent consultant. I have a one-man company doing training and consultancy, mostly on the former res products. I was hired by BEC, the customer that he worked for, because I called a week before he was leaving the company. So they wanted me to get some res knowledge in. Turns out they hired him back. But so now they have both of us.
Yes.
Yeah. And yeah, well, I am on Twitter, but only in the days around these events, and the rest of the year you won't see anything. So if you follow me, it's going to be quiet. Okay, so the agenda. I was going to get this animation out, but
yes,
I forgot.
Yeah.
So we did the introduction. It's going to be a little bit of battle. My part of the presentation is on that side. His is on this one, and then see who wins. Well, now he is...
Right now I'm winning, yeah, I have this one.
Yeah. So we have a few things, of course. Well, we did the introduction. What challenges do we have at that particular customer? And what tools do we need? And, well, how brilliant is it?
Yeah.
And now you were supposed to take over?
I was supposed to take over? Oh, because it's on my side?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but we're just going to go through the agenda. Yeah. You can read it on there. So it's basically just reading for you, as if you don't know how to put letters into actual words.
Yeah, but I'm a trainer, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so, well, the challenge and the tools. First of all, why am I here? Well, the solution is built on the former REST products. They have all three products: Workspace control, automation, identity director, and well, that's why they wanted some competency. And Renee was in all of my most of my trainings in Den Bosch. That customer thought it was better to fly 7 people from Denmark to the Netherlands to get a training instead of flying me into Denmark. That's why that was the first customer I called when I started my own business. Yeah.
Banking industry, baby.
Yeah. Well, and so I have a little bit of knowledge about these products. I specialize in these. That's a nice wall, right? Touch it.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I ended up spending most of my time in this product. And I already had that in when I was working for Res. So what I noticed there is at rest I was doing training. I was high up in my nice white ivory tower telling people how it should be done and how it was supposed to work. And then I joined DEC. And well, often enough my colleagues said, well, come out of your ivory tower and get real. Problem is, if I go down out of my ivory tower, I step on my horse, take my lance, get my trusted companion, the Pancho, whatever he's called, on his donkey, and I fight the windmills. So, either way, it's bad. And of course, they needed somebody here to stand there and look pretty.
Yeah.
So that's why they hired me. Okay, so what is the challenge? Take it away, Renee.
Yeah, so the customer we have is a banking central. So what they do, they provide wall-to-wall IT for banks, basically, which includes a workspace. So there's 30 plus customers, and now you need to press the button. There you go. Why I say different yet the same is that they're the same because they're provided by the wall-to-wall solution that BC provides. So they use the exact same tools. They're banks. They steal our money. All that shit. It's completely the same. But there are customers that have 12 users, like all of that's the whole bank, and there's one with 1,000 users. So they're different, but yet the same. So one of the things we wanted to do is try to see, well, if we need to operate them and they don't have to differentiate too much, we kind of have to do one configuration database. Because the initial easy part would be to just do 30 databases. But the problem will be then you could go down one road with one customer because you know, I can customize that. And then you can customize this, but because you do a wall-to-wall solution, at some point you're not going to be able to pull that back. So it's one configuration database for all the customers. Since some of the customers are rather small, we try to limit the number of images on VDI. They're about 80% VDI, this custom, or all the customers. So about 15 of them run the same image, and the rest of them have custom images. This also requires that they can run the same software, and we can do some limitations. And we, or BEC, because it's the banking industry, run rather stringent DTAP, so it's idle all the way with the development tests, acceptance, project changes for everything, stuff like that. There's not...
You remember?
I remember.
You had to put it
like
in
DTAP? What the fuck was that? I thought it was like how I play the computer, like DTAP. No. So there's not 3 different environments. There's not testing, pilot, and production. It depends on what feature it is, whether or not you have different environments. So for Citrix, for instance, for VDI, there's only test and production. There's no pilot, but there's a pilot image. So there's a REST database for pilot, but there's no Citrix pilot. There's no file share for test. It's the same file share. It's the same system all across. So you really have to be careful in how you test things and how it can affect the users because half of the system is in production. Yeah.
Yeah. And part of this, since we have not a separate image for each scenario, we use Ivanti automation a lot, where actually I always wondered when I was doing training, does anybody do automation on non-persistent VDIs? Because everything you do is lost the next time. Here they do.
Yeah, for Windows 10, we started using Ivanti automation. So we try to have the same base image, and even in the non-base image, it's the same software. So if you have a package, it's the same software for all 30 plus customers, and all the configuration happens afterwards. So with Windows 7, when we only had Workspace control, we had to do a lot of the customer-specific settings as you logged in. With now that we have automation, we try to do as many of the customer-specific settings as the machine boots, so that it's only the customer or the user-specific settings that you have in Workspace control to lower the logon time.
Do you
And then
use
of course we come back to
service?
this one.
If I use what?
Provisioning service?
Provisioning services, yeah.
So how do you deal with the cache situation? If you do stuff after the disk is sealed, then everything you do will end up in the cache and will slow down your machine.
We forward to persistent D drive. Also what we do is it's the same image across all 3 environments. So when you go from testing to production with pilot, between the same image and it's sealed to a database. So we made an automation job that looks at what OU that the machine is in, and then switches the database and restarts the Workspace service and points it to production, and then checks whether or not the cache is up to date, at least like all of
It's not
complicated shit.
You do the configuration with automation, but you don't do like complete software installations after the disk is sealed.
No.
No,
Okay, yeah. So installation and all that, I have no idea, it's like totally infrastructure, it's SCCM and stuff like that. We don't use automation for software.
I was afraid this was slow.
But you fell over the power supply?
Yeah. Okay, so, well, the brilliance, let's see who's first. You're first.
As you see, we practice this a whole lot. No. Well, one of the things, like as you said, it's very important that we have a generic way of wording. It's kind of easy in this particular business because the users are relatively the same. Like it's a very stringent business. I think banking is probably easier than a lot of other type of businesses because they have the same tools, they use the same systems, and they do pretty much the same work, even across all 30 customers. So we have a very generic way of working. We have to ensure that the users have a very generic way of working. One of the things that isn't that is also in the banking industry, they emit a massive amount of control on the users. So they can't change their background picture, they can't do anything basically. Each check mark has to be set exactly as their IT department has decided it's supposed to be. We try to minimize the amount of work when onboarding a new customer. That wasn't really a problem before because they're kind of locked in. It's not a bank just go out and say, I want to spend 40 billion changing Banking Central. That's not something that happens often, but with investment banking and that stuff, for me, you're starting to have smaller banking customers that aren't really like regular banks, but they're just investment banks, so you get more new customers. And that's why we have variables. So everything, if I onboard a new user or a new bank, I don't have to, like if I have 30 banks, I don't have 30 configurations. I have one configuration to try to look at the context and then set that configuration. All of the customers run in one forest. So they get a resource or the domain with their users in it, and then we have one resource domain in that forest with every feature that a customer wants that is different from the standard norm. Instead of just going, okay, so Bank A wants that feature, so we put that on Bank A, we put that into an AD group in the resource group and say, and tie those groups in each domain and say, well, if you're part of this group, you get this feature. So they can just put domain users in that group, and then they'll have that feature. So when a bank asks for a feature of some kind, we don't just make it for that. We make it as a standard, as a generic feature as possible, so that each bank is going like, oh, that's a really good idea. I want that as well. We don't have to change it for them. It's always generic. It's always based on their context. One of the things that's really important when we're as many people as we are, is that we use a lot of time of standardizing the way that we work, how we build applications, how we put in settings, where we put in documentation, stuff like that. When I say generic way of working, we also have, I don't know if you know how well you know REST Workspace, but all of the shortcuts are in there, and you can just basically say, well, if the shortcut is not, if the application is not there, don't show the program. So each application is also one application, not one for each user, and then you have different context under the configuration and the user settings for each customer, but as generic as possible. It also adds a lot of complexity though. Yeah.
Okay. Actually, when I started at this customer 2 years ago, so I looked at their environment and actually, well, that's off was actually the name of a file, a text file that I created, and everything I found that was not the way I expected it, I put it in there. Because back then, Renee was hired back 1 day a week, so I could wait until Wednesday and then ask him why he did it. And there were a lot of things that were off. And sometimes I thought, well, that's downright stupid. And unfortunately, after I asked him, well, he's a smooth talker. He always managed, most of the time, he managed to convince me that it was actually really brilliant what they did. Yeah. And one of them was, and well, perhaps a little bit in detail, with Automation Manager, Oh, sorry, you want the automation it is nowadays, of course. When you create, when you do something in the domain, you need to provide the domain name and the domain controller. Yeah, and of course, you can use global variables, give each customer their own value for that domain and domain controller. But that requires configuration. So I open a task, and at the domain controller, it says, let me see if I can memorize it, get FQDN, which got the entire FQDN of the computer, strip off the computer name, so you're left with only the domain name, and that's it. And then DNS will give you a domain controller. Yeah, so at first I thought, what's he doing here? He should use global variables, yeah, from my ivory tower. Yeah, and then when I asked him, I'm like, okay, I did manage to catch him on one thing, because he did it in every field. And I said, well, you should do it in parameter, because then you can reuse the parameter. I did manage, I could.
That's a little win, a little win.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, and that's well, that's why they say, if you can't do it yourself, you just train. And if you can't train, you manage, right? So, but I had a lot of these things, right? Where you, I don't know what I did, but I saw my...
Yeah, you can move your cursor with the...
Somebody else is taking over my machine. I did switch off the Wi-Fi.
It's your...
It's your mouse.
Yeah, but...
Your hand mouse.
Ooh.
You can even zoom with that.
I need to get me some of the...
There's going to be a presentation on the presentation device itself later, in case anybody wants.
And, well, I did lose focus on my
Your slide?
presentation. Okay,
There you
so...
go. Yeah, so
Renee comes
this...
up with one of the examples that he figured out.
Yeah, this is one of the things where you don't have a framework for anything that can help you out on this one. You can have workspace management, you can probably have a lot of other tools as well. There's always going to be a limitation where you're going to have to script and use tape and stuff like that to make it work. So Lutzwolf is a small Java program that's called a device controller for recyclers. And a recycler is when you go to the bank and you want money and they go that you want $1,000, it spits out the $1,000. If you deposit money, it puts it back in. That's why it's called a recycler, so they can have that in a safe. And it can only go out programmatically. So if in case they're robbed, they can't actually open the thing. It has user and endpoint specific settings because they can do different things in their banking system about how it's going to work on their cash register machine. But it's not outside of the program. It's in the Java program itself. They wanted to use it on VDI at the time, but it has machine name in both configuration and in the database. The database is luckily file-based, so I could use that. And that is also why the system owner thought it was working when it really weren't when they promised the customers that it could work on VDI. See, what happens was he has a testing machine in his office. He turns that on, he makes it work, he turns on the VDI, puts on the configuration, and it works. He talks to the bank, can you test it? It works. Yes, fine. Next day it doesn't work. Okay? Yeah, that's because his test machine number name was in the configuration, so it only worked every time his test machine in his office were on. So every time they tested it, I thought, why this doesn't work? Yeah, it's because, and he turns it on and go like, it works, what are you talking about? They're like, no, it works, I don't know. It didn't work 5 minutes ago. Yeah, so what I had to do was not only figure out how that program worked and everywhere it put in its configuration, but what I did is we installed it with placeholders, like placeholder machine name, and placeholder domain name, and all the placeholders that I needed. So in all the text files, and Loggy is Java, so most of it was text-based configuration files. And then I patched them on login. So the first login, if the users don't have on their profiles here, they don't have any settings, I just put in template settings for them. So I don't just put in placeholder computer name, of course then the service wouldn't start. So I just patch in regular stuff. But then when they log off, I save that into the user settings. So the next time they log on, they get their user-specific settings in that program, even though it's machine capable. This one I did not put in there. But the importance of that was really happened when something fucked up. Like if a VDI crashed during logoff, they could never get a good configuration back. So it was very important that I also made a version where I could reset everything to placeholders. Or else they couldn't use their recyclers.
And, well, there were a lot of these challenges
Yeah.
that needed to be...
Yeah, for some reason, even though this is in the specifications that you know, put things in app data and stuff like that, if it's a user-specific application, application coders are lazy. So there's still a lot of user-specific settings in program files or in, everywhere else on the computer. So there's, or in the HQLM, for instance, like there's user-specific settings in HQLM. What? So there's still a lot of things where when you have a tool like Workspace Manager, it's very limited to the user profile that you're going to have to go to scripting in order to to be able to save that data.
But not anymore, right? Now we have version 10 running where we can do...
Version 10 can set HQLM settings. So if you have a user-specific context where you can go, okay, so this user, this type of worker or whatever, he wants settings, I can push settings to HQLM. I can't save settings from HQLM. So for that, I still need to do some log on, log off script. Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, we thought we would come up with a joke by now. But we didn't.
Yeah, okay, so next slide.
Yeah.
I can't say we're running out of time because we have
No,
18
yes,
minutes.
yes. But if you think of one, you're welcome to come up here. That is completely fine. Okay, so this was actually a problem that Jan sitting over there also helped me work on at the time.
Actually, this is the only reason why we planned this presentation, this session, right?
That's the one we started about in the beginning. So you can find articles about how to get a USB card reader working in Citrix. You have to do some forwarding and delete some certificates, or else it's going to think it's a certificate machine. Is only going to read the certificates off the card. It's not going to forward the actual USB card reader into the machine. But somebody already solved that for me. Good for the win, right? So that was not the problem. The problem was that the bank sent us these chip card readers, and the ones we had, okay, we could get those working. And then they buy new chip card readers and they weren't working. So we couldn't figure out why weren't they being forwarded into the device. Turns out because we had Windows XP embedded endpoints. When Windows sees a device that doesn't have a driver for it, it puts like in a kind of inactive mode. So and when you start a Citrix session with USB devices in inactive mode, they're not redirected even though you have rules in place to do it. We didn't think of this because when the bank's call and says it doesn't work, I go over, I pick up the card reader, I put it in the computer, it forwards it because then Citrix pulls it before Windows disables it. But if you boot the machine with the device in the machine, it's going to be inactivated before you log on to your VDI, and it won't forward it. So I thought, well, if I unplug it and replug it, it works. But that's not really a solution you can tell a bank. So every morning when you log on, you just take out the old USB plug and put it back in. And there's no like programmatic function to pretend you're replugging in a USB device. But I found out that if you with DEFCON, if you remove the overlying hub that your USB device is connected to, they disappear, and then you can just rescan for devices. It'll find the hub and go, oh, all these USB devices are new. So when they started the cashier's program in the VDI, I detected if it was a Windows client, and if it's a Windows client, we use pexec, the CS client variable, to connect to the local machine and run DEFCON to remove the overlying hub, and wait a little because it's going to take for a while to file on the driver, and then continue the program. So the little PowerShell script going, wait while the program starts, right? It's just a little hack that you had to do in order to get devices in there. So yeah.
And this picture is a bit vague. Well, I downloaded the picture from the internet, put it there, and expected him
this is a
to create
placeholder.
a better picture. And then,
Yes. Imagine that what I just said was drawn out really nice right here.
And then I realized, what if this video comes online and somebody says, hey, this is my picture and I want $500 million from you. So I put a somewhat transparent screen in front of it, so
And
there is no picture.
And just for the sake of that, Rob put that picture in. If you zoom in, Rob put that picture in.
Oh man. So, but it is a never-ending struggle, right? Every day we come up with new things, or well, the customers come up with new things. First of all, well, you start. So now it's not a battle anymore, it's tiring.
Yeah.
So we
So,
go one step at a
too many
time.
cooks. We have operations, so like, it's not me and Rob sitting doing all the configurations, which is really important because or else you have a very slow workflow. So I have colleagues who are probably here sleeping out there, probably drunk because I can't see them anywhere, who also does rest. So it was very important for us to try to create like a framework and a wiki of how to work, but that requires you reading it or knowing that one of the things you did has a standard for it already. So as soon as you have too many cooks, if you created something and they expand on it, they go like, well, you made it, yeah, but now you changed it beyond the animal that I initially designed, so nobody really knows exactly how this works. That's a constant struggle to figure out how do you re-implement changes to an existing configuration if it's not the same person who did it to begin with. And how do you make sure that you don't just look at the configuration and think about changing that based on what you have, but you know the thoughts behind the configuration, so you know when you have 30 plus customers, why was it done in a specific way, right? Yeah.
So, and well, at some point, since Renee refused to go away, I got transferred to operations. And you know REST, right? Logons are slow. You look into it. Well, and of course I looked into it, and I was lucky to find a configuration that at the time when it was created, they all thought, that's nice. There was a policy where customers were not allowed to run applications off a USC bot. But as always, you have one customer that says, well, I want to do it anyway. Yeah, so they were running their applications out of the USC bot, but they wanted those applications to not be available in the start menu when the file server was not available. Well, in Workspace, you can do that. You can create a zone that pings to the file server, and if the file server is not there, you're not in the zone. If you're not in the zone, you don't get the applications in your shortcut, in your start menu. Easy. However, there is no access control on the zone. That zone is calculated for all customers and all users in all scenarios. Yeah. Renee, who created it, thought, okay, I want to keep it as simple as possible, so you can put a number of retries and a timeout on it, which is typically 1 second timeout and 5 retries. He reconfigured it off the top of my head to 50 millisecond timeout and 3 retries. So that would have been fast, right? And so they thought, for a number of years. I got to research the slow logons. I did a trace file, and I was like, what is happening here? First of all, I saw at agent start, the service start, I saw that ping come by. And although it says wait for 50 milliseconds and try it 3 times, it waited for 2 full seconds. And then during the user logon, I saw it happen again, twice. So instead of 150 milliseconds, we had 6 seconds delay overall, only to figure out if one file server in one of the banks was there. And well, and that's the cool part for me as a consultant and as a trainer. I don't have to solve the problems. Well, so I thought. I only have to point them out. So I put up a nice document saying, okay, this is happening. One customer wants this functionality, and as a result, well, we have in total 8,000 users. Well, of course, the users from that bank, they didn't notice anything, because there the ping worked and it was A-okay. But all the 29 other banks, they had to wait 4 extra seconds every time they logged in. Well, once I made that clear, I got all the cooperation I needed to get rid of it. Because of course, in the end they said, well, you do it. Yeah? So,
What Rob doesn't know is I knew that already. I just put that in case he ever needed to work there. I could give it an easy win.
Yeah, well, indeed. So I was told to look at the slow logins, and the first thing I found took, well, in the end, 5 seconds out of the login. All of a sudden, managers started saying good morning to me. Because before that, they were, oh, that's one of those high-priced contractors that they're not doing anything and invoicing for every hour. Yeah, and now
He still does that, by the way.
Yeah.
Sits there and invoices for every hour.
But of course, I don't think I can get a success like that anymore.
Yeah.
And the cool part is because if you know a little bit about Workspace, so when the user logs in, we calculate the zone. If the file server is there, you get the shortcuts in your start menu. But if the file server goes down while you are logged on, we're not removing your shortcuts unless you refresh your Workspace. So the advantage for that one customer was minimal. Or the other way around, you log in, file server is not there, you don't get the shortcuts. File server is brought online, we still don't have the shortcuts. So now we disable the entire zone. Everybody logs on 5 minutes, or 5 seconds faster. But on top of that, we put it on the shortcut. And then of course I have to explain, they didn't put the UNC bot in the command line of the shortcut, because that would fire off all kind of checks that we don't want. No, they had a command, a shortcut with an empty command line, and then the UNC path in a execute command on top of that. So you never know what that application is doing.
Yeah.
And now we did it. Another script. That script pings the server, and it does that simultaneously. So if the server is there, the script doesn't output anything, and the application is started. And if the server is not there, well, the application can't start. But we get a nice output saying, hey, the server is not there. So even the users using the applications have a better experience. And he prepared all that just for me.
Yeah.
And I love him for it.
Yeah, that goes to actually also to too many cooks. Is you can create a lot of simple solutions, but that means if you have 1,000 simple solutions, it's not a simple solution anymore. It's a very complex solution that you can break down, basically. So if you have a lot of applications and you do a lot to make it generic so that when you add a new bank, everything will be configured, that still means you have a lot of configurations in each application. So while each application might be pretty simple, it still creates a very complex environment. And when you have users where you say, well, these have this application auto-started for every user, for everybody in the bank, you just assume that when you go through your testing that that's open, and then you get a new customer and say, well, we don't want that application auto-started. Will that have an effect on all the other programs? So while each individual component might be relatively simple, it just adds complexity in any case. There's no real way around it. However you decide something, you're always going to add complexity as the solution goes on, because there's going to be more configuration in there.
Often enough, I've looked at configuration and I've asked Renee, why are you doing it like this? Why not just simple like that? And then he said, well, yes, but, and then, well,
yeah, what happens when, what happens when, yeah.
And then, so in order to keep it simple, you have to make the configuration rather complex sometimes. What I found at this particular customer is that the troubleshooting skills weren't that great, which is good, because then I can add my added value as a contractor. But imagine, so we have the banks, they each have their own IT department, and then of course you have the central company, BEC, with the help desk. And now that I was at operations, I saw a lot of support calls, and believe it or not, and it was all in Danish, so I haven't used Google Translate as much in my life as I did last year. It doesn't work. User said it doesn't work. Okay, I can get that. comes up with the local IT administrator, he just forwards it to the help desk, creates a ticket, sends an email, it doesn't work. Help desk pastes the email in the ticket, leaves the title, it doesn't work, and then assigns it to us.
Yeah, solve that, please.
Because REST will solve everything, right?
And it solves the problem of everything too. Because that's my
Yeah, it's also, yeah. I once did a internal training, and then somebody had me put on the whiteboard, Workspace doesn't cause problem, it only solves it. And I left it there for weeks, yeah, because that's the case. If you have, I did a training last week for a customer. I installed a brand new database, because I always do that in the training, 3 seconds login. I say, see, this is how fast Workspace can be. All the seconds you add to the login is the stuff that you put in there. But, well, sometimes you need that stuff, and you have to put it in. But you have to be aware that it all comes with a price.
Yeah, you have to be able to scale that up and just look at that specific configuration. But if you have 1,000 configurations, that's just 1,000 times that time.
Yeah, but coming back to the troubleshooting skills, so and then if you say, well, give me more information, it goes back to the help desk, it goes back to the IT administrator, it goes back to the user, and honestly, it blew my mind. Well, it just doesn't work. And all the way back up to you, it just doesn't work. Give me more information. Well, what do you want? It doesn't work. And I'm like, oh, and of course the help desk only assigns it to us when they get a message saying, hey, 75% of your SLA has already passed. And then we get it.
Yeah, and then you get like, why haven't you fixed it yet?
Yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah, that's another issue if you have big companies, is that the handoff is really, really difficult. So if you create something, it just goes through the regular process of going into production. And that can be a very streamlined process. I think it is, you can see it's a relatively streamlined process.
Officially it is, at BEC.
Yeah. Well, the process of it is relatively streamlined. The problem is if nobody feels any ownership of it, it's just a configuration that goes into production that usually only has a business impact. So they only look at whether or not the business impact worked, but there's nobody who's in the operations or anywhere else feel any obligation to how it actually works. So there's no handoff into, okay, what happens if it has to change? What impact can it have if you, from a business point of view, say, well, now this program needs to do that. There's nobody considering the configuration before they actually decide what to do about it.
And it also comes back to this.
Yeah.
So we have dev, we have operations, and we have a deep dev environment, but I don't believe all operations have write access everywhere. I do, apparently, but
Yeah.
the operations guy have
I think they only have write
access to dev and test, and the dev guys have write access to prod, pilot, and prod, which is not good, of course.
But there are release people, of course, that have access. Obviously, we wouldn't be able to release the code. Yeah.
I've been playing around with the clicker, and now I lost my focus again. Oh, no.
You go so raw too.
And of course, it all comes down to documentation, right?
Yeah.
I've had a project where they wanted me to decrease the amount of scripts that one had log in. There were a lot of scripts that did HQLM generic settings with elevated privileges when the user logged in. So I spent months. When I started, we had 73 scripts. I spent months getting to the bottom of most of them. It took me 2 weeks to get alternatives in automation and Workspace for them. But before I could apply them, I had to find the person responsible for getting those scripts. It took me, and at some point they say, you know what, let's forget it. And then it's to replace 20 scripts. And when I did a head count again, I had 75 scripts. So while I was removing 20 scripts, they added 22 new ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Constant
and
work
of
though,
course,
right?
since none of it was documented, well, it's like GPOs. Somebody built it somewhere, but we don't
There's a
know
fire.
why, and we are afraid to remove it.
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah, that's pretty much the same thing. You have people who own the problem, they understand the problem, they understand the business impact, but they don't understand the solution that you provided for them. So, and they're the ones who are supposed to keep it across board, right? It's not the technical guy who did it, because he already handed that one off. But if they don't know the problem, they just thought that somebody solved it at some point. Well, that's good information to have, that you've solved your problem at some point.
but of course, if you don't document it,
Yeah.
and most of the time I had to come back to René, what's this? And then he has to dig into his memory. Oh yeah, I built it for that and that reason, but everything went down to his memory.
Yeah. And I don't have one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're out of time, but that's another thing that is when you have a lot of problem owners or even owners of system owners, and they have programs and they have to get them to work in a non-persistent environment. I have no idea what the program does. I have no idea how it works. I know if they go clickety-click, it's supposed to say clickety-click if you tell me that. So a lot of the configuration and all the stuff that you have to do, you do on programs that you have no idea how it works. So you're very dependent on the business owners to say, well, how is it supposed to work? Like for instance, notes, I have no idea how notes work. I don't want to know how notes work because I've seen people who work with notes. They're all sad people. But I have to make a configuration to make it work in a non-persistent environment. And when they say it doesn't work when I click there, I say, I have no idea how the program works, so what's supposed to happen? Then I have to do an offline installation on a persistent machine to see what actually happens so I can replicate that on a non-persistent machine. So there's a lot of systems like that where you have a black box and you have no idea what software you're actually trying to fix or configure. You just know that it is supposed to be for configuration.
And you know the solution for that?
Yes.
Documentation, of course. And you know what? I have an extra one.
Yeah. Just to you guys.
Yeah, just well, that's it.
Yeah, actually it was it quite a while ago, but yeah.
Yeah, well,
Thank you guys.
Well,